All right, welcome everybody to the collective, formerly the Alchemist Kitchen, and today we're going to do a presentation on Lyme disease and have a look at what it is and some methods of dealing with it. And yeah, so we'll just get started. The name actually, a lot of people call it Lyme's disease, and you'll hear it with an S, but it's actually Lyme disease because it's named after a town, Old Lyme, in Connecticut, where it was first kind of discovered and written about. There's a long history before this 1975-76 case of a mysterious ring-shaped rash and various aspects of the disease, but nobody really knew what it was until in 1975 the State Department of Health wrote a report about several cases, people in the town who came down with these symptoms. So it's named after that town of Lyme in Connecticut. In 1978, they realized it was a tick-borne disease, and in 1981 it was actually identified by Willy Burgdorferi and became named this particular type of bacteria called Borrelia Burgdorferi. And it's almost like a prehistoric bacteria. It's really interesting, and it's super it emulates a lot of different diseases, and it really is has a lot of cloaking mechanisms, so the body's own immunity can't break it down and get to it. And it's a fairly large bacteria, and it has 26 chromosomes. Most bacteria don't have any chromosomes, so it's a peculiar little critter. And the symptoms are similar to a cold. You get fever, chills, headache, fatigue, muscle and joint aches, swollen lymph nodes, and it can show up days to months, even years after the initial infection. And a lot of people will treat it, and it'll come back because they never really successfully got it out of their system. So anywhere in the area around here, all the way out to Long Island, you'll see these tick signs on the trails warning people of how to avoid going into the bush and getting ticks on your clothes. And I'll have to thank my friend Maggie Henna for putting together some of these slides. Here's the ticks in their various different stages. When they get onto you, they'll bite into you basically, and they gorge themselves on blood. So you can see how it starts off in a fully engorged tick on the left there. So exactly what is this Borrelia Burgdorferi? It's the causative agent of what we call Lyme disease, and it's actually a spirochete. Like I said, it's sort of an ancient form of bacteria. You get it from this tick bite because it lives primarily in the tick's stomach, along with a few other pathogens that can get transmitted in a tick bite. And these spirochetes, they bore in to your cells, and your immune system can't get to it. And it also creates a biofilm around it that makes your blood cells, T cells, and things like that unable to identify it. And it has 4 different stages. These little guys they're highly motile. They can spin around and they can travel all throughout your system. Travel along your nerves. They don't get into the bloodstream as much, but they can tunnel all around your body. And if they get to your heart, they can actually, cause heart failure, and you can die. And this, a small percentage of people actually get that far. And if it goes untreated, if you can treat it right away, if you realize you've been bit by a tick, you have a better chance of it. But as time goes on, it gets more and more difficult to cure, and that's what we call chronic Lyme. And there's other things that have been found to have the Borrelia in it, fleas and mosquitoes. And there's other ways of contracting the disease. It's not just from ticks, even though the CDC and everybody says it's only from ticks. But it can actually get exchanged through sexual intercourse, or a pregnant mother can pass it on to the child, and that's quite common, and it's sort of become a epidemic, almost pandemic, when we look at what's happening in society today. So here you see these little guys inside of the tissue up there. They're like little worms, like little corkscrews, and they can spin around to travel, and they have a unique way of forming together in clumps. So they'll actually braid into each other, and they'll form a complex form. We call it the cyst form. So there's these 4 different forms, and in the cyst form they clump together in these little round balls, and then they can back up against cell walls of other things, and they form this biofilm around it, which is like a protein coating. So it's a cloaking device so it can cloak itself, and your immune system won't see it. So they're highly antibiotic resistant. And I have a little video of them that shows a really good graphic of how they move and get around. So it's also spread, as far west as BC, where we're from, and there's some different types of ticks that it infects there. So here you can see them all chaining together to form the little cyst, and they just kind of interweave and twist in on each other till they form this little ball. And you see how they move. They just spin like a corkscrew, and they can tunnel through all kinds of different tissue in the body. Here he is, just traveling along. And when they meet up, they can travel together. So if they need more strength to tunnel into tissue, they can combine the 2 corkscrews, intermix, or they can go tail to head and move around, like these 2 at the top here. You can see they can really get around. I think there's one more. Yeah, here they are connecting together end to end. So they seem to be fairly intelligent, and they know what they're doing, and they've evolved basically to cloak themselves from the body's immune system.
My daughter's mother-in-law was having seizures. She's been having them for over a year, and they think that the Lyme disease
Right.
is possibly...
Yeah, so if it gets into your brain, and it manifests as all kinds of different diseases. So, people get a lot of false diagnoses from the doctors because they say, oh, it's chronic fatigue, or it's Alzheimer's, or this or that, when at the root of a lot of these cases, it's Lyme disease. And a good portion of chronic fatigue, and people with fibromyalgia, have been shown to actually have these spirochetes in them. So, of course, the scientific literature all shows very well that it's transmitted through the tick bites. However, 50% of the time, people don't ever recall even being bitten by a tick. So the Infectious Disease Society, they really hold on to the idea that it's only transmitted through tick bites. But as we're starting to see now, more and more it can be sexually transmitted and transmitted from mother to baby. So originally, it became an issue for veterinarians because it was a lot of the dogs that were showing in the area that were being that got sick, and so this slide's based on dogs, but you can just simply replace dogs with people in this, and it gets spread because they get infected in the birds, and so they ride on the backs of birds, and they've been migrating up into Canada, so it's really spread all the way up to northern Canada. And as we experience more and more warmer temperatures through climate change, the ticks' life cycle, they used to die off in the wintertime because it got too cold in Canada, but now they don't, so they stay alive through the winter. So the warmer we get, the more of an issue it's going to be. So there's also studies that show it's just not just ticks, it's mosquitoes, flies, mites, and fleas, and there's no actual proof that they are actually transmitting the disease right now, but it's becoming so widely spread we gotta wonder. So this is one of the little ticks. It's a deer tick. In the east, you find it in the deer ticks, and in the west more in the black-legged ticks. And so this guy's sort of half filled, and basically what they do is suck the blood out of your body to gestate the babies and to keep warm, and they feed off the blood. So back in 2001, this was a map of the reported cases, and those numbers have been growing quite a bit ever since then. 2015 here is how it spread. And you can see that the ground zero is basically right here, like right off the tip of Long Island to the town of Lyme in Connecticut seems to be the epicenter where it all started from. So how do you actually protect yourself? As it's getting more and more prevalent, you have to be careful when you're out in the forest and things like that. It's a good idea to check yourself all over because they can also be very small in their, the ticks can be like a millimeter big in their nymph stage when they're just very small. So you really have to have a close look at yourself if you think you might have ticks in the area. And if you find one on yourself, then look for more. 70% of the deer ticks in the east are actually carrying the Lyme disease. So it's a good idea to wear long pants and tuck your pants into your socks and check yourself really well when you come back from hiking in the forest. And if you find one that's actually biting on you, don't panic because it's not like it can transmit very easily. You kind of have to squeeze the contents of the stomach into the body, and that's what a lot of people do. Mistakenly, they just grab onto the tick and pinch it, and as soon as you do that, that's what you're doing, is you're squishing the stomach contents of the tick into you. So if you take a fine needle nose pliers and keep them in your first aid kit, as well as a pill bottle if you find a tick that's on you, don't throw the tick away, keep it, because you can have it analyzed afterwards. And later on we'll talk about, there's actually some homeopathic and some radionic type things you can do with the infected tick that you were bit with as part of your treatment. So pull it out by the front of the mouth and try to get it out. People always have used a heat to take a match head or something like that, and you blow the match out and put the hot head on it, and they'll back out in some of the cases, but you generally end up burning yourself more than being able to do that. So you can, once you have that tick, put it in the pill bottle, and if you're concerned about it, send it in for analysis. And then what commonly happens is this bullseye ring rash right where the bite is. As these spirochetes sort of start to tunnel, they all move out in a ring, and you can literally see it on the surface of your skin in some cases, where it just starts to spread throughout your body, and they'll eventually dig deeper into your tissues and move all around. So you can take antibiotics and if you do antibiotics immediately after getting bit, it can be beneficial. And the longer you wait before the treatment, the harder it is to treat. And it'll end up becoming chronic if you don't get treatment. Now, all this we'll talk about a little bit later is also depends on your immune system right now. And these days, our immune system's fairly compromised by our environment and our diet and the environmental pollution. So we're already under a lot of stress, so it becomes quite common. But here you can see how small they can be. So these are the deer ticks that are in the east, and in the west you have these black-legged ticks. And yeah, when the larvae stage, they're just teeny little guys. But they can still be infected even at that stage. And over the year they grow in size, and they're born in the spring they can be quite small. So that's the bullseye rash that you can see right away. And again, that only happens in a certain amount of cases, so don't think that if you don't have the rash that you didn't get infected. And the symptoms of Lyme disease, this is what makes it so difficult to diagnose, because they're really just like flu-like symptoms, but there's a whole gamut of conditions that you could be observing, so that's why you get a lot of false diagnosis, and so doctors have a very difficult time. The other issue with the doctors is most of them are not what we call Lyme literate doctors, so it's important to actually find a doctor, because most doctors go, oh yeah, Lyme disease is so rare, your chances of getting that are next to none, even if you did get bit by a tick. But they're just uneducated, and there's a lot of information coming out more and more to be able to educate yourself. And there's a lot of different tests, and some of these tests can be quite expensive, especially in America. You can spend up to $5,000 going through a lot of these tests. So there's a few good books and a few simple ways to start out. And this Dr. Richard Horowitz has a book, and in this book, Solving a Lyme and Chronic Disease, he has a questionnaire, which is a really good PDF. If you Google Horowitz Lyme MSIDS, you can download the PDF, and that PDF will basically go through and determine, and it's not going to determine that you actually have the Lymes. What it's more looking for is these cytokines, which your body will produce as sort of an immune response. And the cytokines are also become quite prevalent in a lot of other diseases. So even black mold, yeast overgrowth in your intestines, or parasites, other different viruses and bacteria, chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, your body will also produce a lot of cytokine. So this initial questionnaire is basically showing that your body is trying to fight something. And you basically, by having a weakened immune system, like I was saying, that makes you more prone to do it. If your body catches these spirochetes in the right form, they will attack them, but once they form together in a cyst and start to secrete this biofilm, then the body has no chance of being able to get rid of them. And they go in cycles, so they'll move into those little clusters, they'll form the biofilm, and then when you think the coast is clear, they'll break up and they'll start to move around again. And this is why the symptoms sort of come and go. So it's really important to keep a healthy microflora in your digestive system, and this is just one of the problems with modern society. Our microflora has been compromised through all the use of drugs and antibiotics and the poor diet and all these things, a lack of a variety in foods and a lack of fermented foods. So we eat a lot different than we did 100, 200 years ago. And then common things that everybody takes, like antacids, birth control pills, steroids, anti-inflammatories, antidepressants. They'll also weaken your intestinal flora. Water and food. Our water and food is really highly contaminated these days with the glyphosate, Roundup, a lot of pesticides and chemical agricultural products, as well as just a lot of different environmental pollution. So Roger, who's our sponsor here, has the Academy of Healing Nutrition, and he actually goes through and gives you all the basics that you need to know about food combining and eating healthy, cooking healthy. So you might want to check out Roger's Academy of Healing Nutrition. This is Dr. Jay Nielsen, and he's, I'm not sure if he came up with this or if he definitely talks about it. If you Google him, you can find a few videos and some articles on this process of going the next step. So if you go through that initial questionnaire and you want to go on a protocol like this, taking this nattokinase, because what that will do, it's like a TPA, they call it, that they give to people that have heart attacks and strokes, and it keeps proteins from forming blood clots, basically. And it breaks up those proteins. And so that biofilm that the spirochetes are secreting is made out of these proteins. So when you take this nattokinase, it breaks down that biofilm around them and then lets the body's immune system be able to see them. And what will end up happening is you'll have a Herxheimer reaction, which means that basically you're reacting, your body's reacting to, it's like a detoxification symptoms that happen. So you'll bring on all those symptoms of the Lyme. And the way you do this is you start out with very small doses. So you get a bottle of the nattokinase and you break open the tablets and then just divide up the powder, and you start off with a 1/16 of a capsule, and you take it twice a day, and then you slowly, each day you increase, go up to 1/8 of a capsule twice a day, then 1/4 a capsule a day, up to a full capsule 2 times a day. But by the time you get to that 1/4 a capsule twice a day, that's when enough of the biofilm will be broken down and your body will react. And if you have one of these Herxheimer reactions, you will start to feel the symptoms of the Lyme. So you'll get the headaches or the achy joints, have the fevery chills, and the die-off reaction starts to happen, and that creates the symptoms. The other test that's recommended is the Western blot test, and in particular by these 2 labs, Zygenics and Stony Brook labs. And it's basically like a genetic screening where they use electrophoresis to look at the markers in your system compared to the actual markers of the Borrelia. Herbal remedies can be quite effective, especially in the earlier stages. This is a book by Stephen Bruner, who is a brilliant herbalist, and he's formulated this particular formula for Lyme that consists of Japanese knotweed, cat's claw, angiographs, sarsaparilla, and dandelion. And he likes this particular company called Green Dragon Botanicals, and they put together a formula called LB Core and LB Tonic. So they have a protocol, and if you get this book, you can see the protocol for using these herbs. Manjacea is another Ayurvedic herb that's a really good blood tonifier and really good at detoxifying in any case. So it's also a very good herb for working with the Lyme, and you can just get it in capsules and take that. And it reduces those sort of toxic reactions. In any case, let's just say you're doing a fast and you have a high toxic load, you can use Mansia to help detox and clear up the blood in the body in general. Also, CBD oil and all these cannabis products are becoming quite popular with legalization in several states in Canada now. And there's been some reports where people have had the CBD oil on them when they got bit by the tick immediately. So if you see and you even start to develop the rash, and if you get a tick, you can put the cannabis oil straight on to the, topically right onto the bite. And taking it internally will help with all kinds of processes within the body. So today we're talking, or we brought in the Theraphi, and the Theraphi is part of our longevity protocol. It's a unique form of electrotherapy, if you will, based on plasma. And has everybody here experienced the Theraphi? So here, there's one here at the collective, and there's quite a few centers all over America and around the world. So if you find one of them out there, it's really good for supporting the body's ability to heal itself. And the other thing about Lyme's that we found particularly effective is you kind of have to hit it with every tool in your toolkit. It's not just about taking the herbs or taking the antibiotics. The more things you can actually do to help your body get rid of it, the better off you are. So this is the Spooky 2. It's a pulsed EMF device where you hold on to two handheld rods and it pulses electricity through your body. And there's a whole series of protocols that we've sort of come up with empirically, a huge database over the years. I was involved with Rife Technologies in the 90s when a lot of this stuff started coming together. And originally Royal Rife basically only had 12 or 13 frequencies that he was working with when he discovered that he could destroy pathogens with electricity. He was using plasma like we are here with a single bulb. And his partner John Crane sort of popularized this using the handheld device. But these handheld electrical pulsars date back to before we had AC electricity. We had battery machines in the old days, and electrotherapy was a big part of our materia medica in the early days. In all the early medical books, we used a lot of electrical therapies. Today we use electrical systems in medicine for diagnostics, but there's not a lot of treatment things. So a lot of this information kind of got swept under the carpet for a long time. Since Royal Rife's time, they basically destroyed him, even though he successfully cured like 13 terminally ill people of cancer with his electrotherapies. As the American Medical Association was being formed and we shifted towards the pharmaceutical model and got away from the apothecary herb kind of model and started making high-powered chemical pharmaceuticals, they buried a lot of this information of how to use electricity to heal the body, because basically we're electrical beings. This is all purely electrical phenomenon. We live in an electrical universe. And when you get down to the core fundamentals of biology or physics or chemistry, it's all about the charge, and it's all about balancing the charge. So being able to utilize different resonant frequencies within the body, you can actually have a good treatment for a lot of these conditions. So people often ask, well, this is one of the more popular Rife machines on the market today. They have a lot of different attachments for it. And people ask, well, what's the difference between the Theraphi and a Rife machine? And basically, the Rife machine is it's destroying viruses, pathogens, bacteria with pulsing electricity or with a single plasma tube in an RF field. And so it's doing what Rife called hitting the mortal oscillating rate of these particular pathogens. So picture it like an opera singer with a wine glass, where you can produce a strong enough signal to match the vibration, so much so that it vibrates until it actually shatters. Then you can do the same thing with viruses and pathogens. Whereas the Theraphi isn't, I call this a destructive device, and the Theraphi isn't a destructive device, it's a constructive device. So the frequencies that the Theraphi is using are sort of like life-giving frequencies that basically give your body the wavelengths and the energy that it needs to cure itself. So this is the latest Generator X, the Spooky 2. They called it the Spooky 2 because it's really spooky squared, because Einstein, called this a phenomenon of a quantum entanglement, spooky action at a distance, right? He said, well, yeah, he called it spooky. How could this quantum entanglement exist? And obviously there seems to be some kind of connection with the way these machines are working and how they're targeting these things. So the Spooky has several of these attachments. They have a colloidal silver maker, laser pulsar, with these laser diodes that are in this wristband towards the bottom. And there's some machines you might pay $10,000 for really laser therapy machines and stuff like this. But what the Spooky guys did was really cool, because a lot of people were making Rife machines and just charging exorbitant amount of cost to make them. And so they almost did it like an open source project, where they had a team of engineers design the hardware and design the software, and they basically manufacture the components pretty well for the cost is what you're getting it for. So the actual generator is only like $200, and you can get the whole kit for a couple $100, and you have quite a successful little machine for treating a lot of different things. And the new one's also doing diagnostics, where it's pulsing. You have a little finger pad, the little green thing here, where it'll monitor your heart rate, and it'll feed frequencies into your body. And when your body responds by either your heart speeding up or slowing down, and you can program the machine to do that, then it'll record that frequency in a database, and then later you can turn and run those frequencies back into the body, and you'll find that things will shift with it quite successfully. So here it is with the Spooky Plasma. It has what these tubes on top here. It has two different types of tubes. Just a general long tube, and this one here is called the Phanatron tube, which is kind of based on what Rife was using, because Rife was using old X-ray tubes, and it's similar to an X-ray tube, the way the cathode and the anode is oriented on there. There's also magnetic pulsars on the market, and this is Soda Instruments magnetic pulsar. So using the magnetic pulse therapy, what it's basically doing is there's a coil in that little wand, and it produces a high Gauss magnetic field in these pulses, and you can put it on your body in different areas. And a lot of people with Lyme has said that the magnetic pulsing has worked quite well for them as well.
If somebody's got like a cancer tumor, could they do it over?
Yeah, you can do that too. In quite a number of diseases, one in particular is malaria, because malaria sort of concentrates the iron in the cells. So one of the hypotheses is that you get enough iron deposits in the infected malaria cell that iron can shift when the pulse hits it. So similar to like water in a microwave, where you're moving the iron around enough and it'll heat up and destroy the cell. So the magnetic pulsing is another means of doing it. And what we've done with the Theraphi is we've combined a lot of these technologies sort of into the machine. So it has a magnetic component, has a photonic emission light component from the tubes, as well as a huge electrostatic field that you're surrounded in. This is a new product that's come out recently called the Wave Force 1, and they're reporting quite good success with Lyme's too, and Lyme in particular they're working with, and freemedica.com is their website, and they have a program that can help you out, and it's relatively priced as fairly well as well. And I don't have one yet, but a friend of mine has just recently got one on order, and her son has Lyme, and we're going to be following the results of that, so there'll be more to come. But if you go online and look at their website, they have quite a bit of information on there. So here's some really good internet resources. Yeah, if you take a picture with your phone, you can get a lot of these websites, and more there's just getting to be a real the internet's been a really good resource for this. So it's important to, if you're seeing your doctor and you think you have Lyme disease, is to try and find a Lyme literate doctor, or to educate your doctor himself. And there's a lot of good literature out there, and the two doctors I showed earlier, you can reference their material. There's a movie, a documentary that they actually just released the second part to. It's called Under Our Skin, that kind of tells the whole story about Lyme. And for people that don't have much time, there's the YouTube video all about Lyme disease in under 200 seconds. So that's basically it for this portion of it. Of course, we as humans are incredible machines. We don't understand, we haven't even scratched the surface on how the body really works. We've done all kinds of medical research and everything keeps changing as we learn more, but the deeper we go, the more questions there are. And the human body is so intricate that it's so highly complicated, and what we got to realize is it's not we're not just human. We're many things that make up the body, as we're starting to hear more now. So you hear stories like, we're made up of 10 trillion cells or 100 trillion cells. Who really knows? It's somewhere in between there, and 90% of those cells in your body are not human. So we have all these different bacteria and microorganisms that are working with our body to achieve a homeostasis. And our microflora in our intestines is a good example. And if you look at the genetic material that we're made up of, well, 99% of the genetic material in our body is not human. So we have things like mitochondria in each cell, and these mitochondria are almost like bacteria themselves, but they actually produce the ATP and they provide our body with the energy that we need to actually function. So we work together in a symbiotic relationship. And for a long time, for the last 100 years or so, once we realized that these germs existed, immediately people were like, oh, these things are just bad, and we got to get them out of the body, and they're what causes disease. But it's more the terrain that we have to look at, and keeping a clean terrain and keeping the body in balance, because there's good microorganisms and there's bad ones. So if you have a really poor lifestyle and you have a lot of bad food and these kind of things, well, you're feeding these bad microorganisms, and they're causing the damage. But they get out of balance, and those bad ones sort of overtake your system. And it's really what you want to do is be able to feed the good bacteria, because they're actually when you actually eat, it's actually you're feeding the bacteria in your guts. and they're making all your vitamins and different hormones and all these different chemicals that we need to live. So we work together. So I'm going to go into a little bit of the part, if we can stop the camera. That's our first half of the presentation. And well, actually we'll take some questions first, and then we'll get into a little more esoteric side of Lyme. Yes?
What does Wi-Fi do to our cells, and how can we counteract the damaging effects?
Right.
Just repeat the question.
Okay, so what does Wi-Fi do to our cells, and what can we do to prevent the damage? Because this is starting to become, a very popular topic, because we're continuously adding RF radio frequencies into our field. If you look up in the buildings as you walk around, you'll see more and more microwave towers coming up for cell phones. We have Wi-Fi routers. When you turn on your cell phone, you try to find your router, especially in Manhattan, you're scrolling through a list of hundreds of them. So we're starting to see that this compounding effect of this RF has a pretty big effect on the body, and it's totally been suppressed. There's a lot of literature that have been written about how the body responds to a lot of these radio frequencies. And the problem is the noise. So what happens is the body entrains to frequencies. Just like when you have a pulsing light in front of your eyes at a certain frequency, and you have electroencephalogram strapped on your head reading your brain waves, you'll immediately see within seconds your brain will start to entrain to that beat, that rhythm. And that's what we do as people. We fall into these rhythms. And so a lot of frequencies like that, what happens is the body gets stressed because of one particular frequency all the time. So your Wi-Fi router is fixed at a particular frequency, and if it's too close to your bed, or you're continuously being bombarded by it, eventually your body cells are also trying to emulate that rhythm, and they get exhausted because they're not going through a natural bandwidth of all kinds of different frequencies. Because everything is in the whole universe is all frequency. Everything resonates at a certain point. But if we lived in an environment where there is no RF, and you looked at a spectrum analyzer that looks at basically frequencies from very low to very high, and you get these little peaks like this, they call it, and you got what we call the ground floor. And if you are not in a RF polluted environment, you'll just see all kinds of random frequencies going up and down like this. So that's sort of the ideal situation. And as soon as you turn on your Wi-Fi router, you get this peak that goes up like this, and that's this certain frequency of what your Wi-Fi router's at. And so your cells become entrained to that, and because they don't get the variety, it's like having a variety in food, or just the variety in life kind of thing. If you do one thing all the time, you eventually break down. So that's what's happening to the cells. And some of the reports studies that have showed that, including cell phone use and heating up of the tissue in your brain, because you always got this thing on the side of your head or in your pocket. And people that have eaten, they did one study in Sweden or Switzerland, I believe, where they fed a particular family just microwave food that's all they ate. Every single thing they ate was in a microwave. And eventually they got leukemia. And so what we don't realize is that these has a great potential for a lot of damage. So what you want to do to prevent that is sort of, there's a few devices out there that are, I was really skeptical about a lot of these things, because they'd say, oh, you put this button on the back of your cell phone and it blocks the EMF. And I thought, well, how can that work? If it blocked the EMF, you're not going to be able to make a call because your signal's not going to go out. So what seems to be the case is that what they do is they're like little crystals in there that will get excited by the EMF, but they'll also scatter the frequencies, so they pulse at different frequencies. So it's kind of like bringing that noise floor back up to get multiple frequencies. There's a device called the Wave Rider out there that started as a military technology, because in the military these soldiers would have these helmets on. They'd have really high-powered amplifiers in these helmets so they could communicate back to the base or with each other. And it was emitting a strong signal, and it was echoing around basically inside of their helmet, and they were getting headaches and getting sick. So they came up with this idea of making a wide array of frequencies that just filled in that spectrum. So you had your carrier frequency here, and then it just produced all the other ones. And that's what the wave rider does. It makes a broad spectrum of frequencies. And so there's a few devices out there, but you really have to shop around because there's some that aren't so good as well.
What do you do with food and herbs? Would increasing L-DOPA help?
Yeah, maybe Roger can comment on diet. And Roger, did you want to say anything?
Kind of a big subject.
Yeah, yeah.
But essentially, the picture here is to just really, really strengthen the immune system. And of course, a really healthy diet, and that's, we can go into a lot of detail over a 1-year training course that we do. But we add in the tonic herbs. So I think that's very, very important to really, really strengthen that immune system. And we add in the medicinal mushrooms.
Right.
So that's an absolute must.
I didn't mention that.
Quite
Yeah.
frankly, it's a sort of a must for you anyway. I mean, to be using the shaga, the reishi, and in our training we actually show people how to actually put that into teas and broths. So you don't always have to buy these expensive things. You can just buy the raw products from Chinatown and do more economic things. But there's a lot of teachers, dragonherbs.com is a really good resource for all of the Taoist tonic herbal remedies. So that, yeah, a key word here is the medicinal mushrooms. Use them or use all of them. The mushrooms love the other mushrooms. But we're talking about the tonic, mushrooms here. Reishi, shaga, etc.
Yeah.
Cordyceps would be it's very good for
Yeah. Yeah, these mushrooms have what we call long chain branch polysaccharides, and they can burn. So they're kind of like sugars that are really hard to break down. So what they're doing is they're providing you energy over a long period of time if you take them. And there's all kinds of phytochemicals in there that are really good for your immune system. And there's a lot of really good medicinal mushrooms.
Because it sounds like the noise from all the frequencies is stressing and tiring the brain and the cells.
Right.
So would L-DOPA quieting this nervous reaction?
Right.
To heal the nervous system and the brain?
Yeah. Yeah.
So kuna.
Right. Yeah.
Kuna corrects.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of herbs that actually will stimulate L-DOPA or create it in your system. And yeah, having a good balance of a lot of phytonutrients. And really that's what comes down to, because our diets really got narrowed down to eating, a high carb diet. A lot of people are experimenting with different diets. It seems that the ketogenic way of maintaining your system seems to be pretty good. So getting away from the carbohydrates and the sugars and running more on a fat-based system, your brain and your body basically runs on two things. Runs on sugar and ketones. And so ketones are what's found in a lot of these plants and these phytochemicals. And so you can actually train your body over time to not run on sugars and carbohydrates, and run more on fats. And a lot of people have had really good success with that lately. I know there's been so many different fad diets over the years, and you'll hear one story saying, oh, this is good for you this day, and then the next day it's bad for you, like coffee and butter and a lot of these things. But really it's more in the variety and not overdoing anything too much. If you drink 2 pots of coffee a day, well then yeah, coffee's not going to be good for you. But if you have a cup of coffee a day, it's probably one of the best antioxidants that we get in our modern society, because it's a common thing to do. So getting a lot of antioxidants, switching over to ketogenic diet, anything you can do to strengthen the body's immune system is going to help in this day and age for sure. Yeah.